scoops in this piece. I'm MC Lars.
I'm MC Snax. Yo, what's up?
We are back. I mean, Hatchet Chat is going great. Shout out to everyone for their comments. We got people saying, yo, why aren't you doing it weekly anymore? Well, your boy Lars started his master's program in instructional science and technology for the sole purpose of making Hatchet Chat twice as informative. So I have a lot of work that we're doing, and my man Snax is working on stuff constantly. So we figure if we bring it to you every month, it will be tight instead of being kind of rushed and whacked. So that's what's up. So that shout out to people asking us why it's not weekly, but that's what's up.
For sure. We're still going to be bringing you that Hatchet Chat flavor. Going to be a little bit more spaced out for the time being, though.
And speaking of space, this episode is Psychopathics From Outer Space, which I think this is obvious. It's a reference to Killer Clowns from Outer Space, which is an old school horror movie, which is also sampled on Thy Staleness from The Wraith, the introduction, which I found on Reddit. Killer Clowns from Outer Space. This movie freaked my sister out. Shout out to my amazing sister, Sarah. She is terrified of clowns since then. Like my parents were so dope. They'd have like magicians and clowns at our birthday parties because, you know, shout out to them. But my sister's scared of clowns still to this day. It came out in '88. It came out like a month before Who Framed Roger Rabbit, just for some background. No, like a week. But that was like a kind of a cult movie. Had you seen this movie, Snax?
Yeah, I did. I remember after I got into ICP, I just happened to stumble across it at a Blockbuster locally when I was like probably 11 or 12, and I had to get it. Flip my wig. It's an insane movie, super dope B horror movie. It's so fresh,
but terrifying. It's just terrifying because it's like the premise is ridiculous, but they pulled it off. I mean, I think about it. It is a killer clown from space too, right? He's an alien, or it's an alien.
Is he?
Doesn't he come from? He's a demon from space. Maybe I'm mixing them too. Maybe the fans can correct us.
He might. I don't know. I think I seen the original like way back, but I don't remember that. That's crazy though. That's man. Who knew that clowns from space would be such a trope?
Check it out. It refers to Pennywise, an ancient alien eldritch monster, and the character and the main antagonist of Stephen King's best-selling novel. So that's what's up. Clowns from Space is a trope that runs deep. Let's talk about the background, Snax. You've got some great research, so let's go with this record.
For sure. So, this is yet another compilation. It was released alongside Dumpin', we believe. Similar to Dumpin', it wasn't really promoted with an official release date. By most accounts, including yourself, it was able to be found on the Wicked Clowns from Outer Space tour. That was the first time Juggalos were able to buy it. As early as the first date, we assume, which would have been September 30th, 1999. The show you seen was in October, and it was on that tour because you're home, you bought it. And it's, unlike Dumpin', though, it's more of a compilation. And similar to like Forgotten Freshness, but it's got a lot of tracks probably more tracks that no Juggalos would have heard up until this point. And it features ICP and Twiztid, and it's just super dope. We do get a couple of Blaze features and Misery as well, and it's a super, super tight compilation.
It's interesting how the tour was the Wicked Clowns from Space, but the album was Psychopathics From Outer Space.
Right.
So it's interesting how they made the branding a little different. So basically the theme of the tour was like Violent J and Shaggy were visiting from space and coming to Earth, and then using the Dark Carnival imagery of like their satire and critique of society. And it ties in this long tradition of fictional autobiographies. So we can go back to 1719. Daniel Defoe wrote Robinson Crusoe, which a lot of people might recognize as referenced in Amish Paradise, actually. It's the use of an autobiographical voice to endorse a text as true narrative, which obviously isn't true. And Robinson Crusoe is a story of this dude. It's basically Castaway. He's stranded on an island. The book promotes individualism and the solitary, self-sufficient man who's mastering nature through reason, and he eventually becomes the king of the island. So this is a similar literary theme as Robinson Crusoe. These characters are stranded on Earth. Gulliver's Travels, which we talked about extensively a few episodes ago, Jonathan Swift makes use of an autobiographical voice to parody the claims of truth in contemporary fiction, like to parody the concept of Robinson Crusoe being real. And he satirizes this idea of individualism by Gulliver becoming a prisoner of the Lilliputians. These little people hold him down. So like, if you're out of your element, you're going to be disoriented, and it doesn't necessarily mean that your privilege and European roots can dominate and control anywhere you go. Like, you're going gonna run into problems, which is a very good satire. And Jonathan Swift also has a really funny essay called A Modest Proposal, where he goes on and on about the famine in Ireland and everything, and you think it's really serious. He's like, I'm going to propose something, and he then makes it, this is a very ICP kind of theme. His solution is to eat babies and then use what's left of them to build houses. Oh. So that's his modest proposal. It's like very famous satirical essay that's very grim. So Jonathan Swift is twisted, but he twisted in the correct spelling of it. And there are other examples. Tom Jones by Henry Fielding, 1749. It's that story of this orphan and his life, and it's written as an autobiography. And then the most famous one, Dickens' David Copperfield, which is basically Dickens' life. And the literary term for this is a roman à clef, which is where you take your autobiography and you change the name. So that's a little different than the fictional travel narrative, but fake autobiographies are huge through the literary tradition. And so ICP uses this a lot, and Dirtball is an example of this. I wonder if you noticed this, Snax. So the guitar riff on this reminds me a lot of We Give No F's from Bizarre, Bizarre with the question marks. Do you agree? Did you notice that?
Yes, absolutely. I definitely know what you're talking about there. And overall, I think that if this song was on either of those albums, Jeckel Brothers or one of the Bizarres, I wouldn't think twice about it. I think it's a really high quality cut. It's just one of the strongest songs on the album. Kicks off the album well, of course, too, because it fits in with the outer space theme, because ICP and Twiztid are playing alien characters who are like sending their observations about Earth back to their like alien captains.
Which is a very cool concept for a song. And it's like the Gulliver's Travels thing. Like, what do you realize? What can we fix about these cultures? Who does the captain voice? Because that always threw me. Like, I do not recognize that person.
I think that's Madrox doing like a nasally kind of high-pitched voice.
Really? That's Madrox?
I think so. That's what I got from it anyway. But Juggalos let us know. Like, if I was to bet money, that's who I'd say it is.
Let us know what y'all think. The synth line reminds me of the synth from the Killing Fields. Yes. I don't know if you noticed that. I never liked this chorus because I always hated how they were like, they'd throw in like a Korn, Limp Bizkit thing just because that was big. But I listened to it yesterday, and I don't dislike as much as I did before. But it feels very... it feels...
Of that era?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. You nailed it. And all the songs on this, I don't know if y'all noticed this, they're mastered really loud, and they peak a lot, but they're not mixed. You could tell they just bounce the rough mixes. So it doesn't feel like a finished compilation where it's Forgotten Freshness does.
One thing I wanted to say about the chorus, it's interesting because it actually makes its way onto Thy Unveiling when they're going through all of the... like at the end, like where they reference a bunch of like songs, this is our world, that's on the Unveiling. And like because I heard The Wraith, that was the first ICP album I heard in full. So as I was going through their back discography, I was like filling in what songs were referenced at the end of that song. And it took me forever to finally find out that part is referencing the Dirtball.
Yeah, that's interesting, man. Yeah, I guess that's true. It has become part of the canon, and part of it is because it was on the Heavy Metal 2000 soundtrack, which you noted, but the song is not in the movie. That's an interesting compilation because it's a lot of, like, who else is on that compilation? A lot of bands of that era, right?
Yeah, to my knowledge, that was like a big deal because Heavy Metal, if I'm not mistaken, is like a magazine or something like that. Like,
and the first one was... a very famous animated cartoon from actually Canadian American one that was just based on that magazine and then made this animated adult film, and it's very legendary. I've never seen it. I always meant to. Okay, so check it out. So Pantera's on this soundtrack, System of a Down, Queens of the Stone Age, that's like early Queens of the Stone Age, Apartment 26, which was like an industrial band from back in the day that I always loved. And Billy Idol does one of the voices. So it's kind of like, it's funny because it's like this floundering of an old era of rock You know what I mean? But they'd be like, who's the hot? What do the kids listen to now? ICP, they're controversial. Give them a shot. So,
yeah, it's almost like indicative of that time period where ICP was really a big fixture in the mainstream rock landscape, because coming off the backs of Woodstock, I mean, Woodstock and Heavy Metal 2000, like that might be like the two biggest things as far as like mainstream rock culture they're a part of.
Yeah, so maybe that's why they included it. But also the themes of the Wraith is about like making your time on Earth worthwhile. So maybe it's a reference to that. Apartment 26, going back to that, that band is a reference to the room where David Lynch's character lives in Eraserhead, which is an amazing movie. I think y'all should see that. Have you seen that movie?
I remember, it's been a long time. I was young. I was in my early teens. I remember seeing it, and like I couldn't even absorb what I was watching. I don't know if I remember a single scene from that movie.
For anyone who's ever cared for a newborn, that movie's very prescient, because this is not David Lynch talk, but he basically he has to take care of this weird creature that's like constantly crying. And we watched that like a year before we had our baby, so I relate to that. But guess what? Babies go to sleep eventually, then you can do Hatchet Chat. Also, Jay's verse is so quietly mixed. It's just like, turn Jay up, man. He's the leader of the crew.
I noticed what you were saying earlier about the production too. Like you could definitely tell it was a bit rougher, and it came out on Joe and Joey. We actually forgot to mention that at the beginning.
Right.
So I get similar to Dump In. Maybe they just didn't feel the same pressure to get it as perfect. It was marketed mostly to the Juggalos, as a lot of Juggalos know. Joe and Joey was like that label that kind of put sketchy stuff out on legally sketchy stuff to avoid heat on their main label. So maybe because of that, they weren't too concerned about the production. Definitely has an overall more raw production throughout the compilation.
It's the label that runs beneath the streets.
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
But I'm going to go on record and say that this was the first time I listened to this. I'm like, oh, not everything ICP does is fantastic. And I was like, all right, this has some winners, but like, it just made me realize that I don't say that in a negative way. Everyone's hit or miss. And this is the first time I'm like, all right, this is a merch cash grab, but it's also tight. And this is not going to sell a million records. It's not Malenko, right, but it's tight. If you like Malenko, you might hate this record, but if you're a Juggalo, you'll appreciate this record. I mean, exactly. Also I noticed having the CD was really special, because when you got it on Napster, the MP3s made all the gaps between the songs weird, because there's like that voice saying, you Earthlings are not ready for blah, blah, blah. So it's having the CD of this was like the best way to listen to it, because the MP3 gaps are very jarring. I don't know. Personal problems.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I actually listened to a full YouTube rip because I wanted to make sure like I got all of the, skits and stuff like that. And it's like you mentioned, ICP aren't afraid to release stuff that didn't make it to certain albums or weren't released for other reasons. And like, I think it's cool because as Juggalos, even if we don't like love everything, which is understandable because a lot of it is on these compilations is like their B stuff, or not even their B stuff. Their stuff didn't even make it to B side sometimes.
Their E stuff, D stuff.
E stuff, yeah. We still I like it. It's interesting just to see like what did they make that didn't make it, you know what I mean? And ICP is a band that puts pretty much everything out. Like they find stuff in the vault years later and it'll make it make it out to the Juggalos. So that's one thing you got to give ICP credit for.
Well, and it's because their brand was maximized because of their moments of mainstream exposure, so that became a profitable thing, right?
Yeah.
And you got to respect that in a way. And yeah, it's just cool. There's a whole archive, you know what I mean? Some bands, there's a very finite amount of content. These fools, there's a lot, and it would take a lifetime to digest it. It would take a multi-year YouTube series describing the history. I wish someone would do that. Let's talk about $50. So this is a Led Zeppelin interpolation. That's an expensive thing to clear, and it's like easy to write a riff that's slightly different. But nope, it's pretty much it's Ramble On, pretty much exactly, which is tight. Anyway, this song, Jay tries to sound like Eddie Vedder at the end, and I think that the guitar part at the end, it's just that could have been trimmed down. But that's my opinion. Keep it moving. They're having fun. You know what I'm saying? They're playing with rock music, and I can't fault them for that. So let's talk about Blam. So we're skipping the songs that were on Dumpin' and on Twiztid's original Mostasteless. Blam is a Madrox solo joint, and the introduction at the beginning sounds like a Frank Rizzo Jerky Boys character. Who's doing that voice? Is that Madrox too?
I think that's Madrox again.
Because that sounds like the guy on Mad Professor. This place looks pretty nice.
Yeah.
That's he references the Santo Domingo Monks, which was this CD that came out of chant music, Gregorian chant music, which was a very midnight. Do you have it? Oh my gosh, I'm tripping.
I have that chant album.
Okay, that was like a surprise thing of like, oh, the music industry can be diverse and still sell hundreds of thousands of records of unexpected genres. That was like a very 90s phenomenon. There was a parody of it that came out that was like alternative chant where they did like Smells Like Teen Spirit, and I remember that was like a parody record of that. So it's funny to hear Madrox referencing this. Hey, oh my gosh, that's what's up. My dad had that too.
You gotta love some Gregorian chant, man. You put that on, relax. It's good stuff.
Keep it moving. That's a reference. And then on The Voice, where he does like that very, very, better. Was it Better Than Bad? Because I'm from Motown. That was the first time I ever heard the term Motown, and I was like, oh, Motown, Motor City. So I always used to think about that. But that also sounds like someone making their first song, like doing a weird voice like that, like a Cookie Monster voice that maybe is. I'll say he's trying to sound like a soul singer or something like that. It sounds a little silly now in a hook.
Yeah, for sure. It's so interesting to see him, like, even back then he was doing voices like that. He shouts out House of Crazies. This is a Mr. Bones song. Apparently it was going to be, it came out later on Cryptic Collection Volume 1. And apparently it was going to be on an EP called Something Weird that Mr. Bones, it was a Mr. Bones solo EP. And super cool to hear him playing with those voices. Like, of course, he would become renowned for later.
And there's a Biggie reference. He says he's stronger than Teflon, but when I think of Teflon, I think of like slippery pots and fingernails. So it's a weird flex. He also talks about how he's bragging about his long hair. You see pictures of JB used to have long hair, right? And
yes.
That's like, all right. That's just it's kind of like a kind of moment. But the chorus is tight. I mean, I like this much more than the other Mr. Bones song on this. So my favorite song on this compilation is Sleepwalker.
Yes.
It reminds me of a Poe story called Berenice, which I think we've talked about, where this guy goes into a daze and does horrific things like dig up his cousin in the yard who was buried alive and rip out her teeth, and like it's just a creepy story. So yeah, it starts out like they're at an AA meeting or a group meeting. Legs Diamond does the introduction. He shouts out Nate the Mac. This also sounds like Ringmaster era kind of ICP. And I think his best line is when at the end of one of his verses, he goes, let me sleep on it. It's so tight.
Yeah, it's super dope. This is just an amazing song. It's one of my favorite, Violent J performances on a track ever. Like, I just think he kills it. It's a super scary song. I mean, the idea of sleepwalking is a crazy phenomenon anyway, but like doing like stuff like murder and stuff, that's a horrifying concept. I think it's cool too, because at the I think in between the first and second verse, when he's talking to the group, because he's in like a group therapy, like that's where he's like confessing what he believes to be his crimes. He says something, I hope it's mostly bigots and Richies, but there's probably a few innocent bystanders in there as well. And that's like a microcosm of the violence in ICP's music. Mostly bad people, but there's a few innocent bystanders in there as well. So I thought that was noteworthy.
Oh yeah, he definitely sticks to the character, and this fits as a legendary ICP, especially Violent J solo song. I think this is interesting. It's all about what happens when the id takes over, and Jay has a lot of references to this. He wakes up with all the wrapping the food garbage, the fast food garbage on the lawn, Steak and Shake and everything. And so it's interesting how Jay conflates his appetite for food with his appetite for killing, which is kind of like they're both problematic and dangerous. You know what I'm saying?
Right,
That's
like a carnal desire. I didn't even put that together. That is interesting.
because he talks about how this was Jay was at his biggest, but like before the 6th came out and when they were doing Dark Lotus and everything, he was really wrestling with his food addiction. I remember once on the Hell's Pit tour, I think he said, Shaggy and I both have problems. I can't put down a fork and Shaggy can't put down a bottle. And it's like, okay, we all wrestle with that. And that's an interesting insight into Joe Bruce as a person. I mean, I was like, oh.
For sure. Violent rage and struggling with food. That's super observant. I didn't pick up on that. Dope.
Yeah, it's like sad, it's dark.
Yeah.
At the end when he's singing and like kind of going crazy, and it's like a similar thing where he's just doing a crazy outro. It reminds me of the end of Weird Al's Nirvana parody, Smells Like Nirvana, where he's like, yada, 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 yada. He's just like going on and on. It's like, all right, Jay's, the A&R aren't stopping this. This is another example of them going hard. You got to give him props, but it's a little ridiculous. Like
it is. As far as like those elongated outros where Jay's just going insane, this is probably one of my favorites because it does sound so much like a crazy person. Like he just sounds like he's losing it, and like he's doing these weird melodies. Like I gotta say, I like this intro for one of those crazy rambling ones. This is up there with the best in my opinion.
And then there's the skit at the end. Blaze did a interview with Fagel Lovers where he talks about how so much of his introduction with Twiztid was just them riding around in the car, listening to music, going to different suburbs of Detroit. So it ties in with this. So they're all in the car, and this dude, Big T, comes, who's this big dude you could get, and it's a very funny specific scenario. And then later they'll take him out to eat, but he doesn't have money to pay. It's just a very strange skit. I wonder if they wrote it for this album, like why the skit connects between songs. That's weird to me. If this is like outtakes, right? Did they do a bunch of skits, right? Do you ever think about that? For
sure. And that's a great question. Like, was the skit itself an outtake, or did they just put in there, to spruce up this album? I'm not sure. It is definitely a funny skit. Once again, I think that's a Madrox voice.
Move over a bit. Let me get in there. Oh, this song was the Hallowed Wicked single of '99 you mentioned.
Yes. Sleepwalkers. Yeah, it made it to that single as well, which would have come out almost around the same time as this compilation.
This next song we're going to talk about, I think, debuted on the Man Cow show. It was their Eminem diss. Eminem hadn't come out with Marshall Mathers LP. We don't need to go too much into their beef, but this was kind of what... I feel like this was huge for ICP when this went viral on Napster. And I also think this is why people thought Twiztid was part of ICP, because it's a Madrox performance. People would always attribute it to ICP. It's very, very homophobic. The whole joke is, haha, Eminem is not a masculine man because he's not a heteronormative character, which hasn't aged well, but...
it's very 90s.
Very 90s. And at the end, Jay's like, Eminem, you're doing the horror raps. I was doing that in 93. And he's going on, and he's like, your flow's okay. Your flow's tight, but you're stealing my style. And Jay acts as Dre in the back and forth. It's just, as a parody... Other than the part when Madrox comes in, the beat changes a little bit and it's off. It's definitely, you could tell they had fun with this, and it's definitely an iconic piece of the 90s. It's so iconic that Eminem referenced it on Marshall Mathers. He says, dang right, I got a slim booty because I don't blah, blah, blah. You know what I'm saying? It was huge for them. It's a part of an era and Madrox's talent to emulate voices. But then Twiztid would later call out ICP for the Slow Your Roll, which is the iconic homophobic diss. But this is very homophobic, and it's not excusable, but it is part of the history. Let's talk about an outtake from Jeckel Brothers, Dead End with Ice-T. Okay, check this out. Oh, he talks about Smoke My Ashes When I'm Gone. That's a Tupac reference. When Tupac died, his boys and the Outlaws went down to Venice Beach and they smoked a blunt with his ashes. So that's a reference to that. I feel like the beat's a little too all over the place. The chorus, check this out, Snax. Did you think about this? He goes, why I da-da-da-da-da. It made me think of why I never liked chicken pot pie.
Oh,
it feels like a throwback to chicken hunting.
For sure. I can definitely see that. I know I can, when I like this song a lot. When I listen to it, I know why it didn't make it to Jeckel Brothers. But I think it's a dope song, and I think it's cool that they put it out. It's interesting, too, because the line where it's like, I know the devil's waiting on me, but does God approve of you killing me? And, like, that's a pretty deep line. Like, that's questioning the death penalty.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because by the late 90s, Snoop was huge. ODB was huge. Ice-T was kind of like an iconic old school rapper, but I don't think many people, other than Cop Killer and 6 in the Morning, like an OG original gangster. I don't know if most millennials can name many Ice-T songs unless they're huge old school rap fans. I mean, he was the first West Coast gangster rapper, and Ice-T is iconic and very funny and famous for his beef with Soulja Boy and like all that. But, I mean, maybe it was partly like, our fool's gonna, know who this is. And I'm sure he didn't get paid what ODB and Snoop did. So
I think he only got 4,000. I think Violent J actually states the amount in Behind the Paint, and he actually talks about how leave it to the newer guys to want more, and the legends are, way more humble and stuff. He talks about how cool Ice-T was about it, and Violent J it has talked about it in further interviews as well, how like much he loves and respects ICP, like when he comes around, or Ice-T, when he comes around, he like knows everyone's name and stuff. Like he's just a dope dude.
Yeah, I heard Ice-T is a great guy. He was Body Count was on Lollapalooza, and my friend Kevin Lyman, who runs the Warped Tour, always talks about how Ice-T was one of the coolest guys he ever worked with.
Word.
And so I've heard people in the industry who've worked with him say he's great. So shout out to Ice-T for doing this. I'm glad this came out. I wonder, though, you mentioned this, just like on Carnival Carnage's Never Had It Made, there's a harmonica sample from The Wizard by Black Sabbath. Could they not clear it? Or, I mean, maybe they just put that, right?
Yeah.
Is that part of why it didn't come out, maybe?
Very possible. Very possible. I feel like they maybe if they really wanted it on there, Island could have afforded to clear it, but Black Sabbath sample is probably not cheap, so who knows?
Let's talk about, so they had re-released First Day Out. Twiztid covered First Day Out. Mr. Johnson's Head got remade. Redneck H 99 is another remade song. And so, do you think this could have been an outtake for, like we talked about how Jeckel Brothers was originally going to maybe be a double record. Maybe this was going to be on that.
For sure. I could definitely see this being an outtake from Jeckel Brothers. I think it's a really dope remake. A lot of the lyrics are totally redone. The beat sounds like it might be remade, or at the very least, like heavily spruced up. And we get a feature from Twiztid, which is dope because you hear Twiztid rapping on an old school ICP song. Redneck H is a Juggalo classic. They play it live a lot, and this is a great remake. I would love, because it's similar to what they did, like you said, with Mr. Johnson's Head, and Twiztid did First Day Out. It would have been really cool to hear more of these remakes, because I just think when like every single one, all three of those, they knock it out of the park. So it would have been dope if they did like a full album of like remakes.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, because a lot of those old songs with Chuck Miller specifically, in the early Mikey Clark stuff, like they were figuring out their style. My favorite remake is a Mr. Johnson's Head remix.
Yeah, that remix is so good.
It's remake.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So Amazing Maze. So this is a funny story. My friend, Dr. Will Tattersdill, who I met when he was at Oxford, he's a professor at the University of Birmingham in England. He wrote a book, his thesis, PhD thesis, is about the fin de siècle science fiction movement, which means science fiction at the end of the century, which means at the end of the 19th century. Brilliant dude. I've come and guest lectured in his class. We did a song together with this project, Faceometer, called The Irritating Maze, where I recommend you all check it out. It's this long story where all his friends come in, and basically I rap as part of this story about how to get out of this maze they're stuck in, but basically the things you have to get out of it, you have to fill all these bureaucratic forms. There's like static from the handrails. There's a lot of like annoying things that the guy has to finish to rescue the woman. It's like a parody of a King Arthur legend. I mean, shout out to Will Tattersdill. He's a brilliant artist. Faceometer's dope. He's the guy who does the intro on Dewey Decibel. He goes, "This is the Dewey Decibel system." That British voice.
Fresh.
So some of y'all might recognize him. But anyway, every time I talk to him about our song for years, I've known this dude since 2006, I say, man, the Amazing Maze came out great. And he's like, no, the Irritating Maze, Lars. Yes, it's a great song. Because I'm referencing this song from the Pendulum compilation. And we did check out any of you care, I did a podcast with him. And in the podcast, I talk about this, how Amazing Maze and the Irritating Maze could not be more different. So I wanted to talk about that.
That's super fresh. So you can find this. We can find the song, the Irritating Maze.
Yeah, it must. I think it's on Spotify. If it's not, it's on YouTube. It's on his Bandcamp. It's very long, but I think it came out great. He wrote my rap, so he's
cool.
You know, some people who are like such brilliant musicians, but they are also so talented at other things. Like this dude is a professor of 19th century science fiction and the history of the genre.
Crazy.
In Birmingham, but his music is like, I feel like an alternative universe. He could have doubled down on that and done that, but he's like, no, I think I'm going to get my PhD, study at Oxford, and teach this stuff. And he toured with us and K-Flay in like 2009. He opened for us. So
fresh.
I love you, Will. If you're watching this, I love you. And I think that The Amazing Maze is also a great song. And then there's a thing where the family chants, "You effed up," which I remember like at the gathering when KG or someone like made a mistake introducing something, they would chant that. That's like a wrestling thing, right?
Yeah, big thing in wrestling. You'll hear it in like multiple independent promotions. If someone botches a move, you're going to hear that chant. But at gatherings, you'll hear it anytime. If someone like slips or something in the mud, you're getting a "You effed up" chant for sure.
Okay. I thought it originated from ICP, but I think you've explained that it's a reference to wrestling. As most things from wrestling that I've later found out about don't come from ICP.
Yeah. Now, I wouldn't put it past the Juggalos to start that chant. I'm not sure of the origin. You know what I mean? There's a lot of crossover between wrestling fans and Juggalos. So yeah. I don't totally discount the fact that it started at gatherings.
Okay, maybe y'all can leave a comment. You have some good research on this, Snax. So let's talk about the stuff you've learned about The Amazing Maze.
For sure. Great song. I think is one of the strongest songs on the compilation. Was also released as the first accompanying single to the first issue of the Pendulum comics, which was a 12-issue comic book series that each issue came with a CD single. And basically The Amazing Maze is a Dark Carnival attraction used like all the other Dark Carnival attractions for punishing evildoers who made their way to the Dark Carnival. And it seems to be used for some sort of game show because at the beginning we hear Jamie Madrox and Legs Diamond as hosts of this kind of game show like situation, and basically people go into this maze and try and escape, but it's the Dark Carnival, so you're not getting out alive.
So the two songs from this that were from the Pendulum singles, which came out with the comic books, are The Amazing Maze and $50. And so we'll get into the Pendulum compilation. Let's finish our last one we're going to look at today, and we're going to wrap it up. The second Mr. Bones Madrox song, I think it's interesting how Monoxide is not as present on this compilation other than like the Twiztid stuff. I just don't like that Madrox song, and I'm going to say it. Snax, let's talk about the aftermath, and let's wrap it up.
For sure. So, a lot of Juggalos know Psychopathics From Outer Space was actually ended up being a series. We've seen two more so far, Volume 2 and Volume 3. 2 and 3 actually were, I think, a bit more highly produced, and they came out on Psychopathic, not Joe and Joey. And this is really just indicative of the era between Jeckel Brothers and the Wraith, where they're establishing their other artists, establishing their supergroups, really pushing Twiztid. I mean, this is pretty new. This is pretty, like, Twiztid was still relatively new to the Juggalos at this point. And ICP and Twiztid are both, like, promoted equally on the cover of this album. It says 15 rare or new songs from ICP and Twiztid. So I thought that was noteworthy. Because at this point probably all Juggalos still weren't sold on Twiztid because it took a while for them to fully embrace Twiztid.
I thought it's interesting how both these CDs have like glossy, shiny artwork, to make them stand out. Something that is cheaper to produce if you're going to do 5,000 copies than like print a million. So that's interesting. They both look similar in terms of the production.
Absolutely. Agreed. Yeah, for sure.
And this is not on Spotify. Volume 2 is on Spotify. I don't know if Volume 3 is, but it's interesting. Well, because of the samples, because of stuff they maybe weren't feeling, like the second Madrox cover, Madrox solo song. It's a good compilation. I give it a strong 7 out of 10, maybe 6 out of 10. But we're not trying to rate them. But that is my opinion. I just did. No disrespect. I think the Psychopathic Rydas album, even though that's problematic in some ways, is so much more fun and cohesive and dope. Than this. I
agree with that. Like Riders, I love, dumping. I will say, like, when this album is good, it's really good. Like the Dirtball, I think, is one of ICP's best, like, deep cuts. I love that song. I think the production is amazing. But I agree, though. It's a compilation of non-album stuff. So you got to take it for what it is.
It's like it's a forgotten freshness almost.
Right.
We're going to talk about next episode. So this episode was episode 23. So for episode 24, we're talking with a dude who worked at one of the Hot Hits locations, and we're talking about the Island re-release of Mostasteless and like the differences between the two and what it was like to be on the retail side in Detroit. Were there multiple Hot Hits stores? Was it a chain?
That I actually do not know. So I'm looking forward to hearing from him. We might be able to ask him.
Yeah, I'm saying, like, I wish we had someone we could ask. That's what's up. So tune in for that next month, and we will be back then. Until then, I'm MC Lars.
I'm MC Snax, y'all. Whoop, whoop.
Whoop, whoop. This has been Hatchet Chat. See y'all.
Peace.